Good afternoon, folks. We're going to go ahead and jump right into the 10 best practices for improving special education. Thank you for joining us today. This is one of many of the webinars we do in a multi-part series. Today, we're going to focus on techniques, practices in and around special education, how it integrates in with scheduling as a component of what we do, but really thinking about how do you do the best things for kids with the resources you have while wrestling with a number of challenges that come along with serving the specific needs of children. So we'll dive right in. To get you started, quick introduction, I'm Craig Gibbons. I oversee the DM schedules and a number of other things here at DM Group, but participating today as a specialist in and around the K-12 scheduling space. I'm joined by my colleague, Richard Viard, who is the VP of Product Development. We do, in fact, have practices in and around K-12 scheduling and have built software solutions as well to support areas where they have been less supported in the past, special ed scheduling being one of those.
Do you mind turning on your camera?
Oh, I'm sorry, Richard. I had a technical difficulty here. Apologies. Thank you for that. I had turned it on and it must have flaked on me, or I flaked, probably. Anyway, Richard and I will be guiding you through the material today in terms of how we'll go about that. We'll walk through the presentation. And Richard, if you could go to the next, we'll give you the opportunity, if you'd so like, to share something in the chat about yourself. Any questions you have, please go ahead and use the QA button in the ribbon to go ahead and capture those. And then we will record this. We'll share it after. So we'll send this out to you. At the very end of the session, we'll have a very short survey as well. So please go ahead, fill that out, send that over to us. Your feedback's invaluable. So thank you in advance for that. The way we'll flow through today, we'll share a little bit about DM Group if you're not sure who we are and why we're here talking to you about this space, this special education and scheduling specifically. We'll give you a little context. The challenge for some of the things that we're seeing, at least as we work with customers, school districts and schools around the country. The 10 best practices we have to share with you around how to improve special education and delivery, and then give an opportunity at the end for some questions and responses. So we'll go through that over the next hour here. So who we are. We've been around for 20 years, almost 20 years, 19 years to be specific. And throughout that, we have been really focused on how to help public education, or really education systems across the country, achieve improvements, just continuing to improve by combining management best practices or techniques with education best practices. We believe those two things working together can have quite an impact on public education. And the three elements we focus on in all the work we do is resources, operations, and students. And really what we're looking at here is how do you leverage the resources you have in the most effective ways to produce the best outcomes for students. So we believe when we're constantly incorporating all three of these elements into your work, you can bring about truly sustainable, high impact results for your students. In terms of who we work with districts large and small, coast to coast, north to south. And those are suburban, urban, rural, you name it. We've had been blessed to work with folks of all different areas of the country and chasing a number of different situations for their students. One through line is, regardless of the size of the districts or the location, there are a lot of common things that people are wrestling with, and just how they go about tackling those things are really based on the resources they have and how they formulate their staffing and other things. So a lot of through lines to the work we've done, but we've had a chance to work with a number of different situations, coast to coast, north to south, across the last 19 years. And so we bring some of that learning today forward to you to share some of the best practices we have for you. So in terms of how we go about doing that, we have four primary ways we help folks. We have a learning program, which is really focused on bringing people together, convenings. We have a membership program that has a convening annually for superintendents, leadership development, wrestle with those big issues that districts are facing year in, year out, or even those things that are trending more challenging. Also provide a publication that we push out annually to make sure that people are getting access to the work we're doing, as well as colleagues of ours, and getting the voice of the districts and how they're experiencing things they're doing for students and sharing ideas and thinking, and also a number of institutes. So these are opportunities to dive deeply into things like academic return on investment and secondary scheduling. So learning opportunities, structured learning opportunities for folks in specific areas as well. So DM Learning DM consulting. So this is the opportunity. A lot of folks tell us I don't have the staff, the capacity, particular skill sets in my district to tackle some of the work that they're doing. So they will consult with us or hire us to be their partner in the work. We'll roll up our sleeves, we'll get into the district, and we'll tackle whatever topic it is that they need assistance with. A lot of work here in strategic planning, program evaluation, academic return on investment is how we flavor our program evaluation, scheduling K-12, you name it. So lots of special education, lots of different areas that we help folks out hands-on in the district. I'll jump over DM schedules for a moment to talk about Breakthrough. So Breakthrough is a different methodology for tackling a problem of practice in a very short period of time, 8 to 10 weeks typically. And what we do is understand where the district's trying to make the improvement, get right close to where the challenges are and where the work needs to be done. So we're talking about teachers in the classroom, helping kids with reading or math or various things. So we'll formulate a team focused on the problem of practice and help folks get new and really outsized results in a very short window of time. So rapid succession of learning, looking at data, iterating to produce those results. That's Breakthrough. DM schedules, and actually we'll take a look at the next slide. DM schedules is focused on K-12 scheduling. We have different offerings for the elementary grades than we do the secondary grades. As you can imagine, there's different techniques for scheduling individualized student schedules versus cohort-based sorts of scheduling like we see in elementary schools. Along with that work, so we have multiple ways we serve people. We can provide software and tools to make it easier and faster, more coordinated, and with integrated best practices. That's what you're seeing here. DM Schedules is the platform. We have tools for elementary school scheduling, and then we also have the student services that need to be scheduled throughout the day as well through our special DM schedules for special education. So we have software solutions to help people do things easier, faster, and with integrated best practices. Also have an offering to give you additional supports if you need a partner wrestling with particular challenges in these areas, or even really just offloading these efforts to us for school scheduling, special ed. We can't offload those efforts, as I'm sure some of you would like us to dive more deeply into, but we'll build your main schedule, your school schedule for you as a third offering under the DM Schedules umbrella, but support you through your special education scheduling as well with these tools. So a few different ways we serve folks, but we do this work day in, day out with thousands of educators. In terms of how we're positioned a little uniquely, and this is what brings forth the ideas we're going to share today. This is a combination of expertise over the last 19 years and really learning from all of you out in the field and getting some real world practices that have helped shape a disciplined implementation of how to approach scheduling and use of time in elementary and secondary schools. And then also build out technology where appropriate, where there are gaps in terms of serving districts and schools in and around that use of time and scheduling specifically. So DM Schedules, unique offering and something that Richard and I are embedded in day out. So let's dive into special education, just thinking about some of the challenges we're seeing, you're seeing, and talk through those, because those are going to be really the things we're pursuing as we talk through our best practice. So one, student needs and the complexity of those student needs keep rising, right? So we're coming out of COVID and other areas where it's not just onesie, twosie sorts of services in some areas, or in many areas, it's a volume of services across the spectrum of needs for students, and some needs have been continuing rising. And a lot of that, as noted here, is in the wake of COVID. Kids have lost a lot of the socialization opportunities and other things that are so critical for those young students. The other piece is that the costs continue to rise. I live in a small local district, Massachusetts. We have a lot of our districts are town-based. Our special ed costs increased 14% for out-of-district services this year. Wild cost increase, very difficult to manage despite best efforts. So people working very hard, but they're not seeing that shift in results that they want for kids. So really thinking about how do we curb that and really start to trend in the right direction. Staffing, extremely challenging over the last few years. It's getting a little better in some areas, but still really hard for the kids that need the most support. So lots of different things combining here to really create challenges for you as you're working with special needs students and making sure they get what they need. And I should clarify here too, as we say special needs or special education, we're talking about really a wide range. So we're talking about those kids that might just start needing some extra help in the classroom, all to the kids that have much more severe needs. So a lot of our work is focused on a mild to moderate need range. But when we talk about special education, we're talking about a long continuation of what level of services kids might need. And so as we look at this and the staffing shortages, situation's improving a little bit since January 2022, but we're still seeing a lot of hardships in terms of filling in those roles for folks that are working with the kids that have potentially the greater needs in your school. So that's still a challenging issue that a lot of schools are faced with. So one of the things we like to do right out of the gate is to understand where you are at. And as we look at some of the things that I just touched on here, trying to understand how you're experiencing this in your local districts and schools. So this poll is really an opportunity to share what's kind of top of mind or maybe most critical for you in terms of staff shortages or just really not enough collaboration, coordination across your different teams and resources. Data we have common thread is data rich, information poor, right? So how do we leverage the information? Do we have it? Too much one-on-one service when small groups would be appropriate. All the other stuff that goes around serving kids, meetings, paperwork, you name it. And really trying to make sure that we can serve all of those needs, right? It's compliance-based. We have to get those services to kids during the school year. So it looks like staff shortages are still top of mind for a lot of folks. We also are seeing the excessive times in meetings, paper, so the things that are getting in the way of spending times with kids. So those two, staff shortages and other stuff, is at the top of the list here, with not enough time to collaborate and scheduling coming in a close second. So thank you for sharing that. We'll be mindful of that as we go through these 10 best practices. So in terms of thank you. In terms of how we've positioned ourselves to help folks, one, we've got experience. So we've done this work across the country, hundreds of districts, and really diving deeply into what their goals are, how they're trying to achieve them, and what's getting in the way of that. We've had the opportunities we've had have produced very strong results. So people focusing a little differently, organizing a little differently, changing practice, dramatic results. And it's kind of covered a wide range of supports and services in and around special education. So, as we look at MTSS and ELL, so populations that need additional supports in one particular area or another, the work that we've done has had an organic impact on other groups of students throughout the school and their needs. So a couple of cases here, the first being a urban suburban district. It was focused on 8th grade, the work we were doing, and really trying to raise the ELA proficiency. So you can see just working with that district, figuring out what the impediments were for kids to succeed, thinking about a more systemic, holistic approach to serving students with particular needs, increased their proficiency a little over 20%. And this is work we did in a school year. So these are pretty big gains for a single school year for some very critical skills. Obviously, ELA proficiency as you're heading into high school, it needs to be there. And so solving for that gap, and also just high school graduation rates. So thinking about what do kids need, how are they not, or what's getting in the way of them achieving or gaining access to those resources, and really just thinking through how do we create a system and leverage the people we have differently to address these needs. And so saw an increase of about 14% in those. And in all cases, did not add a single staff member. In some cases, there was actually attrition and did not fill for those. So been able to work more effectively with the resources you have to produce those better results. So really great experiences, really strong results. What we're going to share today is a byproduct of some of that. So a couple of things. As we were talking about that, you can have big gains, cost neutral. There's time and effort, but there's not additional resources that you need to spend to get some of these results. However, you do need to make sure you have data that can inform your decisions, and you can turn it into information, right? That pile of data. Make sure that the whole community that's responsible to influence change is participating hand in hand and collaborating strongly. that it's both thoughtful and careful planning, right? There's a lot of people that whose lives may be impacted if you're implementing change here. So just making sure that everybody's involved in that and you think through your timelines and your approach to implementing change, and then continuous and strong communication and collaboration throughout, keeping people well informed step by step. That's going to create a very different result without in comparison without that. So these are the bread and butter items. Those are on the plate. Got to have people working together, got to have good communications, need to leverage the data you have so your decisions are fact-based and not anecdotal, and really drive collaboration throughout. Here, let's go ahead and have Richard dive in with the 10 best practices. I'll come back a little later to talk about a few more things. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. Hi, everyone. All right, so let's get started and review kind of quickly the 10 best practices we've identified for improving special education, and then we'll deep dive into each one of them. So the first one is to be more focusing on outcomes, especially student outcomes. Then we'll talk about effective use of general education. So how general education can really help students with disability or students who struggle. The importance of reading, adding extra time for interventions and enrichment as well. The importance of content-strong staff to deliver those services. Finding your strengths, or actually the strength of your staff, and playing to staff strengths. Really rethinking the focus of paraprofessionals and what the responsibilities we give them. And we'll talk about some examples here and some findings we have. Expanding SEL, as Craig mentioned, a lot more needs in terms of social emotional students. The importance of a strong homeroom schedule. And then finally, we'll talk about the effective use of time, effective use of staff time and student time. Great. So let's jump in. And starting with focusing on outcomes. So very often when we start working with a district, we'll ask, what are some of the goals you have? What are your goals? What are the things you're measuring? And very often what we get is a list of activities, not really a set of result-driven goals. So for example, what we hear is, oh, we are adding more paraprofessionals, or we are implementing co-teaching, we are extending IEP meetings. Those are all techniques or activities, but they're not really looking at the end result. So what we prefer is really starting with, we're looking to increase student growth measures. We're looking for 10% increase. We're looking to lower referral rates in special education, or we're looking to reduce the achievement gap by X%, or increasing the number of students succeeding special education every X months, etc. So these are result-driven measures that you can then start thinking about activities you can put in place to achieve these results. But without focusing on the results and the student outcome, the activities have really no measure and no measure of success. So really important to focus on student outcomes first, and then derive some activities you're going to do to try to measure whether they have an impact. So for our second best practice, it's really the effective use of general education. And this chart shows us state by state the results of general education as reading performance by state, and then against special education students with IEPs. And so what you can see is there's a correlation. States who tend to do better in regular education also tend to do better with special education. So correlation is not always causation, but there's definitely an impact here. When students have received strong tier 1 support, they will tend to have fewer students referred to special education, or to do better in terms of the achievement gap. So what we really recommend is having students spend most of their time in the general education classroom, right? The least restrictive environment. General education teacher taking primary responsibility for teaching all the students. So not just the students and then sending some of the students to special education and pull out, but all the students, even the ones that are identified and have some pull out services. And then having the general education staff participating in those interventions. So they know the student, they know the curriculum, and they are, one of the best ones to provide some of the interventions or the enrichment, as well as other staff like reading specialists. And we'll talk more about the roles of highly effective teachers. So number 3 is the importance of reading. And I'm probably not telling you anything you don't already know. Most referrals in special education are due to reading difficulties. And referral rates in 3rd through 6th grade, when reading problems make it difficult to learn reading, math, etc. So by being a little late on the reading, that's really impacting other subjects as well. And so this results, I'm sure you're very familiar with, the graduation rate of students who read at or above grade level is much greater than students who who are below grade level or by grade 3. So DM Group has created a framework for reading. It's based mostly on research that we've done, including the National Reading Panel and What Works Clearinghouse. And it has 10 elements. One is based on standards. So it starts with clear and rigorous grade level expectations for students. The identification of struggling readers beginning in kindergarten, so very early, and frequent measurements of achievement to make sure that students can get the supports they need right away without waiting for 3rd grade to find out there's a deficiency in reading. Core instruction, so we talked about the importance of Gen Ed, but a very strong Tier 1 core instruction, at least 90 minutes of reading a day for balanced core instruction and explicit teaching of phonics and comprehension. So a strong curriculum in reading. And then having that intervention time, so at least 30 minutes of additional time, not during the 90 minutes of reading, but in addition to, for students who struggle. And tight connection of remediation to core instruction. So students understand that this is not homework help, this is really related to the core instruction. And then having highly skilled and effective teachers of reading. And we'll talk about that a little more. And then DMC added some management techniques, since we're very focused on management. Putting a person in charge of reading is shown to have great results, as well as combining professional development as well. So for best practice 4, we touched already about that 30-minute minimum extra time every day. So let's expand a little bit on that. Districts that have successfully closed the achievement gap provide extra instructional time every day in addition to the core content. So in elementary school, we really recommend having at least 30 minutes a day of additional instruction. And then in secondary, of course, the schedule is a little different. In secondary, it's based by periods. And typically, this would be an extra period a day dedicated to those intervention or enrichment for students who may not need interventions. So what this could look like on the schedule, on the left, we have an elementary schedule. On the right, we have a secondary schedule. But essentially, during the core block, this is where the first presentation of content would occur. Current year materials are presented. Learning from peer questions, participating in the classroom discussion, very important. And then during that extra time, maybe this is extra literacy support or extra math, this is where the interventionist, reading specialist, or the math specialist can spend some time pre-teaching, reteaching the material, reteaching prior year content if it's identified to be missing, addressing fundamentals and correcting misconceptions. And now we get to the content strong staff. So we touched upon that earlier, and now Craig is going to launch another question. And the first question is, do you know the average? Okay, Craig, this is the third. Sorry, this is not the second question. The second question should be around reading support. And so as we figure out the survey here, the poll, the question here is really who provides support in your school in reading? We have homework teachers, reading specialists, special ed teachers, paraprofessionals, or maybe other teachers. Great. So we're seeing some answers come back. And it looks like the majority of you have special education teachers. And then we see also homeroom teachers, paraprofessionals, and other teachers. All right. Thanks for sharing that. And so our recommendation is really to provide these remediation intervention support with content-strong teachers, right? Content-strong teacher is more likely to have a wider repertoire of ways to teach students. Significant gains are achieved when a content-strong teacher provides interventions. This is where we see the most progress being made. So a little comparison. So maybe a generalist, special education teacher, or maybe even a paraprofessional may be able to, review some test questions, show the correct answer, provide homework help, provide preparation for future tests, etc. But what they can provide is something a content-strong teacher will be much more versed at, associating each incorrect answer with underlying concepts, inferring misunderstanding from incorrect answers, teaching prior fundamental skills, teaching correct material using many different approaches depending on the student and the student's learning style, etc. So really we see a lot better results when an interventionist, a content-strong teacher, maybe a reading specialist is able to provide those supports. So playing to teacher strength is very important also. So allow your teachers to play to their strength. Special education may have expertise in specific areas. And so instead of everyone teaching reading, math, science, social studies support, you may have teachers who are very strong in math, have them only teach math support, or some interventionists who are really strong in reading, or special ed teachers who are very strong in reading, have them focus on reading and have other teachers teach math. Specialization also simplifies professional development, right? So less content to learn and to master, and they can focus more on the content they are very strong in. So sometimes you may have teachers who have content-specific expertise. So as I said, focus them on that type of content. Some teachers have pedagogical expertise. They may be good at coaching other teachers or coaching the homeroom teachers. Social emotional expertise, leverage those skills for teachers who are particularly skilled in that area to focus on these skills. And then also some teachers are very good at organizing, at managing. Maybe you want them to focus on case management, etc. So really thinking in terms of who you have and what their areas of expertise is, and playing to those strengths. So let's talk a little bit about paraprofessionals, because very often when we do this type of research and work with the district, we find that paraprofessionals have a lot of responsibilities, and sometimes they're providing supports that they may not be the best qualified staff to provide. Nationwide, the number of paraprofessionals per 1,000 students has been increasing. Paraprofessionals play critical roles, as I said, in the lives of education of students. However, paraprofessionals are also given a growing role in supporting academic needs. So if we go back to thinking about the most qualified teacher, this might not be the best role for paraprofessional to provide academic need support. Now, some paraprofessional may be very skilled, and that is okay, but in general, they don't have the knowledge and the research-based knowledge to provide those services. So here is an example of very often what we'll do is we'll do a time study of special ed staff, and we'll ask for a given week for staff to just report on what they're doing, hour by hour, day by day, and then we analyze the results. And so what we find is this is a report on paraprofessional in a rural district, which of course I won't name, but it's very typical of the work we do. And we're finding that paraprofessionals on average spend over 50% of their time, sometimes over 60% of their time, providing support in academics. So this is really something to look into and to try as much as possible to reassign this work to other, maybe to health, safety, behavior, rather than academic. Focusing paraprofessional support on health, safety, and other needs, and have the certified reading teachers, RTI interventionists, who are trained specialists to focus on these academic needs. For number 8, we'll talk a little bit about expanding social emotional learning supports. So despite adding counselors, social workers, paraprofessional, districts still feel understaffed in addressing the growing challenge of social emotional behavior support. And this is something we see over and over when we start working with the district. But one thing we found is the use of time for these staff is often misaligned with the role that we thought they would provide. And so here's an example, again, of that same time study where we looked at social worker direct service, meaning what percentage of their week is spent serving students, directly spending with students, as opposed to doing paperwork, we know they have a lot of other responsibility, of course. But when we ask in the district, how much time do you think social workers spend with students, we often hear, well, they spend all their time with students, or maybe 95% of their time. But what we find is actually on average, they spend much less than that. And our clients are always surprised when this report is shown that on average, they spend less than 50% of time with students. And the first reaction is always, well, your data is wrong. And then we actually open schedule after schedule, and we see that it's actually accurate. Now, the averages can be misleading because some people, and you can see on this chart, are spending 80% or 73% of their time with students. So there's a misalignment of what the expectation is, and maybe staff, either are overwhelmed with paperwork, with meetings, etc. And so really by analyzing how staff spend their time, you're able to identify these, what is this person doing 80% of their time doing to optimize their time compared to people who are doing 28% or 30% service. So very important, you may have enough staff, they may not be doing the things you anticipate they are doing. So increasing the number of behaviorists rather than paraprofessional is really important. They'll be able to diagnose why a student has disruptive outburst, provide students with coping mechanism, giving a chance to teacher to avoid guidance to teachers to avoid triggers, etc. So a behaviorist who is professional will be able to identify and help students with things that are not necessarily something that a paraprofessional or homeroom teacher may be familiar with. And then providing professional development to homeroom teachers to incorporate SEL into the curriculum. So we see some schools have an SEL period, or maybe they incorporate SEL as a special. But it's also important that the homeroom teachers be provided professional development, because the students are in their classroom for most of the time. And so they should also be trained in helping students who struggle with social emotional needs. And then sometimes we've seen partnering with a local nonprofit counseling agency or a teaching hospital. Some higher ed programs can really help getting some help at a very low cost or at no cost. So for our best practice 9, let's talk about a strong homeroom schedule. So what do we mean by that? So too often special educators have no input in the scheduling process. So we've seen that time and time again. There's a lot of focus on the classroom schedule. Every teacher is putting their priorities into the schedule. And then once the schedule is published, then special educators need to find when they're going to pull out students, and maybe sometimes go classroom to classroom to find out when each teacher is teaching reading or math, so that they don't pull out students from these periods. And I'm talking about that teacher autonomy. So what we see sometimes is the principal will decide will lunch, recess, and specials occur, and then each teacher has autonomy to create their own schedule, and that makes it very difficult, as you may know, if you're a special education teacher, to then schedule students and try to find where are the common threads in that schedule that I can pull 3 or 4 students in a group. And then the other practice we often see is a preference from teachers to teach reading and math and core in the morning when students are awake. And if you do this at every group, you're blocking opportunities for pullouts during these times, if you, of course, agree that students should not be pulled out of reading and math, which is definitely a good practice. So here is an example of those preferred schedules for teachers, where English language arts is taught in the morning at every grade from K to 5, then math, etc., and then other subjects are taught in the afternoon. So for a great part of the morning, what you can see on the right here is you can't pull out anyone from these reading, English language arts, and math, and then a little later in the day, 4 classrooms can be pulled out of time, so that you might be able to form some groups out of that. But then if you look at the end of the day, where all these intervention enrichments have been scheduled at the same time, now suddenly you have 20 classrooms who need support, and you may not have the staff to do this. So what we prefer to see is a schedule that's much more balanced, where this intervention enrichment is scheduled at different times for each grade, so that staff can go grade to grade, and there's always, throughout the day, students who can be pulled out, either from the intervention enrichment block. Sometimes if students have a lot of needs, maybe science, social studies is the next block you may pull out of to protect that ELA and math. So if you look at this schedule, much more balanced. It's also a grade level schedule. Also, everything is spelled out on the schedule. So a special education teacher would know exactly when grade 1 is having intervention, or when grade 1 is having English language arts. And actually, we like an even more detailed schedule, where this English language arts block is broken down into the components of reading, and the math workshop is also broken down into whole class and small group, so that as a special educator pushes in, I would know exactly when math small group is happening, and I can push in during the small groups. You could also stagger these small groups across the different grades, so that you don't have too many classrooms to serve at once. So very important to look strategically at the main schedule in terms of where is special education going to take place. And depending on your school, if you have a lot of pull out or if you have a lot of push in, this may result in a very different homeroom schedules. But essentially, working in conjunction with the homeroom teacher and the specials teachers, having special education at the table, helping generate a better schedule. And then talking about effective use of time. So we've already looked at a couple of these studies where we looked at staff spent with students. And this is really where we see opportunities to cover more services for students with the staff you have, even though you may need that you may think that you need more staff. But if you use the staff you have more effectively, you may actually not need more, and in some cases even need less. So let's look at a couple great levers for making the staff time more efficient. District need detailed understanding of how staff currently spend their time and how they're serving students, and to work collaboratively to establish expectations. So the first thing we do is thinking about the gen ed schedule, again, breaking down literacy and math into whole class and small group, making sure we have the number of instructional minute, and then identifying when it's okay to push in and when it's okay to pull out. And so, for example, during literacy and math whole class, there should be no pull out. And then it's okay to push in during small group instruction. And then you have this intervention block where obviously you can push in, you can pull out, and this would be the preferred time to do it. And then science, social studies might be your next priority, where if a student has a lot of needs and the intervention enrichment block is already used, that would be your second priority. So talking about these levels you have, right? So looking at direct service is very important. because this represents the percentage of time staff will spend with students. And the more time staff can spend with students, the more student need they can serve, right? So obviously a speech and language teacher can't have groups of 10 students, that would be too many, but groups of 3 are perfectly fine. So how do you avoid having a lot of special ed staff spending one-to-one with students when the IEP may not call for one-to-one? And this is something we see a lot in these studies we do. So in this example, it's getting into a little bit of the math, but it's trying to make a point. Based on the contracted minutes of a staff, and we know there's 5,000 student minutes to cover. If all the staff spend 40% of their time with students, you will need 6 FTE. If they spend 50% of their time in direct service, they will need 4.8. And if they spend 60% of their time with students, you would only need 4 FTE. So that's 2 fewer FTE with just increasing the amount of time staff spend with students. So how do you achieve that? Well, looking at how many meetings do we have each week? Do we need to reserve a whole day to IEP meetings like we see a lot? How about paperwork? How much paperwork? How much time is staff spending on paperwork? Compare the time one staff spends on paperwork to another and find out, well, what is this person doing that this other person is not able to do? And sometimes by just having a discussion about it, you'll realize, oh, I thought we had to do this. Oh, no, I always do it this way. And you can find actually a way to improve that. So just an increase in contact time with students can really reduce the amount of staff you need to cover the student needs. The other lever is group size, right? So in this example, teacher 1, and I'm just taking a very small part of the schedule, but they have 60 minutes with 1 student, and then they have 30 minutes with 2 students. So effectively, they are covering a total of 120 minutes with 90 minutes of their time. So their average group size is 1.3. We look at average group size to see how effective are staff at grouping students. Teacher 2 here is spending the same amount of time, but each time they're spending it with 3 students. So they're covering 270 minutes of student time within that same time that teacher 1 was covering 120. So teacher 2 here is already providing more than 2 times the amount of services for the same time they are spending. So, obviously you can't have, as I mentioned, huge group size, but for reading support, groups of 5 are perfectly fine. For math support as well. For speech and language, maybe it's more like 3, groups of 3, and depending on the students. So some students might do better in groups of 2. Some students, obviously, if the IEP calls to 1-to-1, there's nothing you can do there. But really maximizing the group size is a great lever in terms of maximizing the teacher time. And now we have another poll. So just want to find out, do you know the average percentage time your related services staff spend with students? Yes, I have a vague idea, or no. And do you know the related services group size, average group size per staff? So we're interested in finding out where you stand there. Oh, and so I see a yes and a yes. All right, we'll give it more time here. I see I have a vague idea. I see some no's. All right, fantastic. All right, thanks for your honesty as well. So this is one of the things the DMSchedules software, especially the special education software that Craig was mentioning at the beginning, helps us do as staff create their schedules in the software. We have these backend reports which show, in this example, speech and language therapist, and you can see exactly how they've scheduled. So some of this staff may still be working on the schedule. So obviously we need to wait until they are done scheduling. But the software automatically reports based on the software they've created in the software. And then the same with group size as well. So a few takeaways: focus on student outcomes, not inputs. The effective use of general education instruction is key to a good special education program. Ensuring all students can read. This will be important for learning any subject, not just reading. Providing that extra instruction time for students who struggle every day. Ensuring content-strong staff is providing the intervention. Allowing special educators to play to their strengths. Focusing paraprofessional support on health, safety, and behavior, and less or not on supporting academics. Expanding the reach and impact of social, emotional, and behavioral support. Ensuring the school's main schedule is built with that special education in mind, and then knowing how your staff spend their time and having a sense of group size, etc. Great, so thanks so much. I'm sure there's a lot of these best practices you are already well aware of. I hope maybe there were one or two ideas that you picked up on, or maybe this will confirm things that you already know, but now you can go and say, I went to this webinar and they agree with me, and here is why we should do this, and you can take this to your district. So I hope you found something helpful, and I'm going to send it back to Craig.
Thank you, Richard. And yeah, a couple of things to share on top of all this. We saw some comments coming through. So naturally, your circumstances may vary ever so slightly. So consider this as an idea and how you apply it to your particular situation. Also, combining a lot of these, as you can imagine, and maybe you're already doing, really amplify the impact they have, and just really making sure that kids are getting what they need, and you're not overtaxing the staff and the teachers you have to do that. So the efficiency gains and really honing in on that may vary in terms of how you apply that district to district. So just seeing some of those questions in and around how that might apply to different districts. It's all relative. A big part of what we recommend is to make sure you use your data, right? So we can share these ideas, but it's really, what is your data telling you? And if your data is not in a situation where you can glean good information from it, that's a starting point to just say, where are we, and how do we move forward from that basis of fact, combining not only your data but conversation. So let your data guide you, and the results really guide you. So starting with those results in mind. We also have a question just around, and we get this often, is just, where do when I think about organizing time and where I start scheduling my special education students, or even just students with student services, might be the most difficult to schedule when you think about that and where it all fits in. So some people will start with special education or related services. School scheduling, similarly, there's a lot of kids in that core classroom. And so how do we make sure that day flows while also making opportunities for kids to get extras? So rather than work in one extreme or the other, start with special ed or start with core schedules, we really aim for that middle. So understand what you're trying to do, understand the needs of your students and where you want time to be focused to help them achieve the results and your goals for them. But really, start that middle ground. Don't start in an extreme, because inevitably the core schedule may need more resources or may need more or be more fragmented. And inversely, special education wise, if you start there, that may get fragmented as well in terms of opportunities to serve kids throughout the day. So aim for that middle. Understand we need to have opportunities in our core schedule to serve kids throughout the day. Prioritize that. Be clear and coherent with everybody about how to do that. And then layering in services become much more easy as you tackle some of the other things Richard was talking about in terms of all the other stuff that's appearing on people's plates outside of spending time with kids. So yeah, aim for that middle is what we'd recommend, and really think through what needs to get done. And so both aspects of that scheduling and use of time should be considered simultaneously. The other piece, Richard was showing some screenshots from the software just about how we test where time is being spent and what that translates into direct service and other things on people's schedules. So that's a byproduct of just people preparing their schedules in this DMSchedules platform we have. We have the two products, which is part of the question here, school scheduling. So, and we look at special education leadership and staff working closely with building leaders to make sure they're thinking of the needs of those students. Not that they aren't, but just in an intimate way so that a schedule can be built that is complementary to all needs and all supports in the school. And that's really why we actually started with special education, and the main school schedule was getting in the way. So that DM schedules for elementary schools is really designed to build out a nice foundation upon which student services can take place. So it's focused on that core schedule. And then incrementally, once we know we've got a good flexible core schedule that can help support kids that need additional services, we schedule the individual student services on top of that through our DM schedules for special education. And really, those two are working in tandem. So we publish the main schedule into the special education scheduling platform. Transparency is the key here. So knowing what the school schedule looks like for every classroom, figuring out as you're grouping kids and trying to increase group size potentially, what's the right time for all students involved or for most students. So it's an integrated solution that really has helped people be far more efficient, be far more collaborative with how they approach scheduling and organizing, making sure that all student services are getting scheduled while maximizing the people you have. Typically, you don't have a blank check to get more resources or extend the school day. So really being coordinated about that is what these tools have been designed to do and are helping folks do. So thank you for that. There's different pricing for the different products. Please feel free. There's some information here on this slide with whether it's the software questions you have or want to get some more information about some of the practices we shared today, or even how do you prepare your core schedule to complement the special education needs of your students. Lots of great information out here. On DMSchedules.com, we have a number of publications on DMGroupK12.com too, so lots of white papers and rich information there. We do have some more webinars out there that pull these pieces together as well. But don't hesitate to send us a question using scheduling at DMGroupK12. We'd be more than happy to share some thoughts on various needs you may have and help you personalize some of the approaches you're trying to take to serve your students. We will be reaching out after today. Like I said earlier, this is the work we do. We serve thousands of districts, educators nationwide, thousands of districts over our history, but want to take that step with you too. So if you need help, reach out. Happy to help, and also happy to show you more about the software and answer some more of those questions that you all have. If you haven't already, go ahead and put any additional questions you might have into the Q&A section. That's a button on the ribbon of the Zoom. And it looks like we may have answered all questions. So amazing.
Like I see one question that just came in
okay.
was how to manage the intervention period. So you've added it to your schedule. What happens there? So good question. Thank you. So ideally, this is really the time that you use during common planning time to start thinking about the groups of students and which group of students need what supports. But ideally, what we see is the homeroom teachers should participate, either doing some intervention or some enrichment. Obviously, interventionist, reading specialist, math specialist, this is the time that they can use this time as pull out in small groups. This is also a time where your related services can happen. So if a student needs some intervention twice a week, maybe there's 3 times where they can get a pull-out service from speech and language, OT or PT, etc. So what we call it is really all hands on deck for this grade. All the staff flood the grade and provide all the services those kids need. And then on a regular basis during that PLC time, this is where you plan who is going to take which group, and maybe look at data to see how students should be grouped and any new group that should be formed once the students have mastered the intervention they were working on, the skills they were working. But thanks for that question.
Absolutely. And just in the spirit of big schools, small schools, calibrate that based on your needs. So if you only have a single classroom in your grade, work a lot of schools that have that. We also, so maybe you want to work a couple of grades, we recommend don't try to create an intervention period across the school. You're going to stretch your folks too thin, as you probably already know. And then if you're in a much bigger school, so we work with districts that have 12 or more classrooms per grade, think about how you could create, 2 periods so that maybe folks could go across, 4 to 6 classrooms at a time as opposed to all 12. So, adjust that, calibrate that to your needs, but all those techniques can be very helpful. Richard, anything else you're seeing out there? I'm just monitoring a couple of spots here for additional questions.
I'm not seeing any other questions come in.
All right. So there's more information here. We're going to share this recording with you after today, so you'll have it as a resource. And we'll follow up to make sure that you not only get this recording, but you know how to get in touch with us. And we're happy to have more conversations if we can be of service to you. So thank you all. We know you're very busy. Your time is invaluable, and we appreciate you spending it with us. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks so much for your time. Bye-bye.